Tonight we're gonna be talking about free energy. Free energy, one of my favorite subjects. And that's why we've got our energy here. We've got our fireplace going. I tried a little experiment earlier on tonight, and I would say that it was not my favorite experiment in the world, and it didn't exactly work in the way that I had hoped. So now we're doing the real thing. This is the real thing. This is the real fireplace. Because what I felt like doing was looking at a fire, thinking about energy, thinking about how difficult it is to heat at this time of the year, particularly when you're living in a less than ideal situation. And the other thing I was thinking about is how much of our stuff gets wrecked when we don't have proper heat, and we skimp on heat because, of course we don't want to heat up rooms that are, just going to waste energy. And there's actually a pump house where I am, and there's a heater that kicks on. I'm not exactly sure how to turn it off completely. It just doesn't seem to want to go off. And I think about it. That's a lot of energy that it is using and wasting. And then I've got some of my stuff in a wall tent, of all things. And it's great to have it out of the rain and the elements, but I noticed that things get really, really soggy anyway, and they're affected by the cold or by the rain. So I've been thinking about getting a fireplace, just an old wood stove of some sort, and putting it in the wall tent because it actually has a place where you can put the chimney, the flue. Anyway, this is the closest I have right now. And it's really funny actually when you put something like this up on the screen, it actually makes you feel a little bit warmer. So tonight I want to share a video with you. I did play it earlier tonight, but as I say, technical difficulties got in the way, so I'm going to play it again, Sam. And meanwhile, I did want to bring to your attention something that isn't very heartwarming at all, but something that actually shows us, in case people are thinking that we're a bunch of conspiracy theorists when we talk about things like child trafficking and human sacrifices. We're not talking about ancient Greece, folks. This is actually something from today. Human sacrifices in Greece. I'm reading this on my phone. Gatestone Institute, as you can see, gatestoneinstitute.org if you want to take a look for yourself. This came out on the 27th. Greek diplomats were issuing visas to unaccompanied children in order to facilitate illegal removal of their organs. Quote, but the press did not write about them. Gee, what a surprise. Nikos Kotsia, Greece's former Minister of Foreign Affairs, in an interview, this is what she said. I don't know, I think Nikos would be a guy's name. Anyway, doesn't really matter. There are currently 3,050 unaccompanied children in Greece, and 1,272 of them, 42%, are either homeless or they live in a non-permanent residence or in an unknown location, according to the newspaper. Why, it's all Greek to me. Kathamerini. They all face the risk of sexual exploitation and illicit organ removal. Well, when you put the word illicit in front of organ removal, I think that would be just kind of a no-brainer. Kids, I don't think there's any reason why it would be acceptable. Just honestly, sorry. Okay, so we want to get rid of that. The Trafficking-in-Persons Protocol states that if the victim is a child, that is a person below the age of 18, consent is irrelevant, regardless of whether any improper means, such as deception, force, abuse of a position of vulnerability, have been used. United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. That's insane. I had to bring this to you guys. It's just insane. Greece's former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Nikos, in an interview on November 20th, disclosed for a second time that he sent the prosecutor 93 cases that involved Greek diplomats issuing visas to unaccompanied children in order to facilitate illegal removal of their organs. This is happening, folks. This is happening right under our eyes. It's crazy, or under our noses, and to whatever. I'm thinking organs, it's just insane. I mean, these diplomats are already in jail. The fact that I saved a few souls will make me sleep quietly when my life is over, Kotsias said. So the first time Kotsias revealed illegal trafficking organs from children in Greece was in October 2018, when he said, "We sent 93 cases to the prosecutor. Highly evaluated ambassadors went to jail, but the press did not write about them." What would we do if we didn't have alternative ways of getting this information? This is on the internet, but nobody's reporting on it. It's just absolutely insane. I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't have seen it myself, and if it hadn't have involved a person who was already jailed. That to me is pretty good indication of the fact that that it's a true story. It's just appalling. My first job was in child welfare. I didn't last very long. I mean, it was just insane, the things that people were doing. So I've never had any illusions about the idea that people can do this kind of shit to other people, to kids. But this is beyond anything that I ever saw. So these cases are the tip of the iceberg. According to an April 24th, 2018 report in the newspaper Kathamerini, there are thousands of unaccompanied children in Greece who have illegally entered the country, and government authorities have not turned their attention to them. No, but they've given them visas. I mean, do you know how hard it is to get a visa? But no, we'll give them a visa. Why? So that they can get their organs taken out without any permission. It's, I just don't understand. I don't understand this at all. Anyway, if you want to read more, I don't even want to read any more of this, but I'm forcing myself to, because it's not an option. We just can't be deciding that we don't want to be looking at these things. We have to look at them. We have to. I mean, it's just no choice. It's the only decent thing that we can do. I mean, it's just crazy. Anyway, I'm going to leave this with you. Again, it's Gatestone Institute, gatestoneinstitute.org. And you'll see it there. And you can just do a search for it. Somebody sent this to me, but you can easily find it. Human sacrifices in Greece. Absolutely insane. So we have no free energy, but we've got kids being sacrificed. Given visas so that they can be sacrificed, unaccompanied in the first place. Does nobody care where they've come from, or what they've been, why they got there, or who put them on the plane or boat to get there? I mean, it's just absolutely unbelievable to me that humans can be so cruel, and yet on the other hand that we can ignore this. I hold myself accountable as much as anything. We ignore things like this. It's just anyway. So tonight we're going to watch a video that will maybe introduce you to Dr. Eugene Mallove for the first time. I hope that you do some further research on him as well, because he was a very important person when it comes to the free energy movement. He was working at MIT, in the 90s, and he was seeing where the experimentation was being doctored, and he became a whistleblower because he just wasn't going to put up with that kind of shit. So I guess the bottom line is that he didn't work there for very long after that, and he started to disclose a lot of what was happening in the free energy movement, which is basically where all the nefarious behaviors were taking place. And he started to see a pattern. He started to understand that things were being covered up, and that's not a surprise. We've seen the way that the cover-ups happen, but it was an incredible loss to have Dr. Mallove disappear from the face of the earth. One day he was in his driveway, just kind of minding his own business, and apparently somebody came along and gunned him down. And as I recall, I think he was washing his car, but it was just a bizarre situation. It was out in the suburbs, and if that wasn't a targeted shooting, I don't know what is. And Dr. Judy Wood had an assistant, Michael, who met a similar fate. He was walking along the street after having dinner with his mom and his sister, and it was covered up as though it was a purse snatching. Anyway, but he was killed in that purse snatching. Usually a purse snatching doesn't result in a very specific guy who's working on, basically working on cold fusion, working on free energy, same kind of deal. But generally speaking, they don't end up dead. Anyway, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to play this video in its entirety for you. And if you enjoy it, then pass it around, share it with people, and do look into his book, Fire and Ice. Sorry, Fire from Ice. Sorry about that. Was the book that he wrote, and he was just about to disclose disclose his findings to the world the next day. Had he not gotten shot, that was going to be his next course of action. So let me just trying to find something here so I can turn that off, and then I'm going to bring this to you. This is Dr. Mallove. This was done, I believe it was an interview that was taped in the late 90s. And so here we go.
Welcome to this edition of Frontiers, and welcome to Red Rock here in Lynn, Massachusetts. We've come here to set the stage for this edition of Frontiers. Now, just imagine something as you look over my shoulder and envisage a 1/4 kilometer cube of ocean water. Within that cube is a fusion fuel called deuterium, which could provide enough power that equals all of the power that could be generated by the known oil reserves in the world today. Utopian, dream, or reality? Well, enter the debate called cold fusion. That entered the pages of the newspapers of the world and the airwaves of the world when Professors Pons and Fleischmann announced that they had generated a reaction in a simple tabletop test. But at this point, I should introduce our guest for this show. He is Eugene Mallove. He was the former chief science writer for the Massachusetts Institute of Technology's news department. But now he's an author. His book, Fire from Ice, looks at the cold fusion debate. I'm going to leave it to you to decide whether or not it is a utopian dream or a possible reality. We're going to meet Eugene Mallove in his study in his home in New Hampshire. We start with the very first question. I ask him, and that is, just what is cold fusion? Eugene Mallove.
Eugene, the good starting point is really a definition of cold fusion, so we know what we're talking about here. Let me roll that challenge out to you first.
Well, cold fusion has to be defined in comparison to hot fusion, which is the idea of mimicking the stars. The stars make nuclear energy out of very high temperatures in their core, tens of millions of degrees, in which hydrogen atoms, in effect, the central parts of hydrogen atoms, the nuclei, are banged together and they fuse and then release energy and massive radiation, and we get sunlight and starlight. Cold fusion is the process which we believe to be occurring in very special conditions in electrochemical cells that Pons and Fleischmann and others have been working with over the last numbers of years. It's a nuclear energy source, I believe, that doesn't release the kinds of damaging radiations that hot fusion releases.
Tell me a bit about the potential. It's an enormous frontier for people, isn't it? Because of its potential.
The potential for fusion energy use on Earth is indeed enormous. If we believe that the deuterium in seawater, which is only 1 out of every 7,000 hydrogen atoms of H2O in water, is deuterium. It's just the way nature constructed water on this planet and elsewhere in the universe. The potential energy from fusing these atoms together and releasing energy is such that 1 cubic kilometer of ocean contains more than enough energy to exceed all the oil reserves of the planet.
And therein probably lies one of the key reasons for the intensity of the debate.
That's correct. There basically is an infinity of energy, for all practical purposes, that we can get from fusion processes using hydrogen, or a special form of hydrogen called deuterium, which is easily obtainable, essentially free from seawater in the oceans of the world.
Now, you mentioned Pons and Fleischmann. It's Stanley Pons and Martin Fleischmann, two professors who in 1989 announced that they had found the way to cold fusion, that there was indeed energy. What happened? There was such an explosion around that simple announcement. You've studied it.
There was an enormous reaction on the part of the scientific community. The first, of course, was incredulity, and I myself wondered what was going on because I didn't believe that it was possible to circumvent the process that had been engaged for the last 4 decades, that is, the process of trying to mimic the stars by making very high temperature gaseous plasmas in very complex and expensive machines. I thought that anyone who suggested that they could do it in a simple tabletop experiment, which looked like an ordinary high school chemistry experiment, certainly must be wrong or deluded or some combination thereof. But the more I got into it and the more I saw, despite the difficulties with that ensued with attempts to reproduce the experiment and questions over what it really was, I saw that there really was something there. At least that's my very strong opinion. And what happened in the world was that the scientific community reacted first with intense skepticism, but with polite skepticism. They went about their task of attempting to reproduce it. Some got it, some didn't. Those that didn't, by and large, became very outraged at the whole business and started to attack it, and became very severe opponents and are to this day.
You found yourself really sort of right in the middle of it all, because many skeptics say there's nothing to it whatsoever. Particularly, I'm thinking of Nature magazine, the scientific journal out of the United Kingdom. Why are you putting yourself in the middle of this?
Well, I didn't put myself in the middle. I just happened to be in the middle. I was the chief science writer at the MIT News Office in March of 1989. It's my alma mater, and I was proud to be there. I'm no longer there. But I saw the battle raging, the scientific controversy, and it appealed to me greatly as a person who was interested in science, trained in science, in fact, and a writer about science. It intrigued me that I might be able to synthesize the controversy into something of the nature of a book that that people could read and understand ultimately. And I didn't know where the controversy was going to go, quite frankly. I was a skeptic of cold fusion in the beginning, but I grew more and more strongly of the opinion that there really was something there. The book evolved over time. Now, I was right there at the nexus of the people who were attacking cold fusion and those who were trying to study it and find out what it was all about.
What gives you a sense of hope that indeed there is something valid to the cold fusion theory?
The thing that gives me hope is the enormous number of laboratories around the world that have gotten positive results. There are now over 100 laboratories in the world that have various types of positive results for cold fusion, either nuclear products such as tritium or neutrons or charged particles or helium gas coming out. And there are laboratories with very impressive power outputs per cubic centimeter of material in the cells. I can't imagine that all of these experiments, and they're all quite different experiments, and it's not all reproducing the same sort of thing. I can't imagine that they're all systematically wrong. It's not impossible that they're all wrong, but I just don't believe that. I believe the most likely explanation that fits this host of very bizarre results that do fly in the face of conventional scientific theory is that there is a new phenomenon there. And there are some excellent theories, by the way, that begin to explain what this might be. And it is a new nuclear energy source.
As you look at it, what's this saying to the scientific community in the United States?
What this is saying is you better pay attention to this, even though many of you are not paying attention to it. You think that it has been written off by a joke because some very prestigious institutions, including MIT, including Caltech, and a number of other places, Princeton, have done experiments early on, which they thought were negative, and have then dismissed the whole thing outright, and have in fact begun to attack it, attacked it from the beginning almost. It says, go back to the data. Look at the data. Look at the data as it exists now, not as it existed in March of 1989 when it was very preliminary. Take a look at what's happening in the field of cold fusion research today. Look at there are journals that are publishing regular articles now about cold fusion. The Journal of the American Nuclear Society, the journal Fusion Technology is publishing regularly on cold fusion. Give it a second chance, because whether you like it or not, you're going to have to deal with it.
Gene, the whole debate surrounding the cold fusion issue, doesn't it highlight something much more fundamental in America's approach to science and research?
I'm not sure we can draw extended parallels from cold fusion. There are definitely lessons to be learned from cold fusion about the process of science. It's sharpened up many of those issues. But cold fusion is a very unusual event. It's unusual to have something that contentious in science. Yes, in science there have been many revolutions that prompted debates where the passions rose and so forth. This doesn't happen all that often, but it happened in this case. I think it does teach us lessons. It says that in general, you don't do science by majority rule. The majority in this case was wrong, okay, in my opinion. They missed the phenomenon, they continue to miss the phenomenon. They are continuing to ridicule it and saying it's not there, but it is there. Okay? So you can't believe the majority, you can't take the vote. Okay? It also says something about peer review. Many journals, such as Nature and Science magazine, have almost literally banned any positive cold fusion stories from appearing, and in fact have put in the most scurrilous negative stories that they could possibly find. And this says that even some of the most well-regarded scientific publications can be in error, and are capable of being in error when driven by forces that aren't necessarily scientific. That is, they're not trying to find the truth about something, they're trying to literally kill something for their other agendas.
What about the pressure in research, the ability to see something happening that you didn't expect to happen? Isn't that an essential lesson out of this, that you don't come to your research with such a locked-in preconceived notion that you actually miss something that's flashing there.
Well, I always thought that the whole point of science was to be open-minded and be on the lookout for new things, particularly anomalies. Science is driven by anomalies. When you see something that departs from the ordinary, that's the most beautiful thing, because you want to study that, and it teaches you that there might be something else lurking there that you didn't understand before. Now, here we have, in the case of cold fusion, a very anomalous claim. That is, take heavy water in a cell, put a palladium rod in and a platinum rod in, and put some lithium carbonate salts in it, put electricity through, and at a certain period of time, you will get more power coming out of this cell than you put in electrically. And you will get tritium coming out, and you may get some low-level neutrons, and so forth and so on. The anomalous claim that more power could be coming out than is being put in is an extraordinary claim. And there are many laboratories that have that. Now, there is a refusal on the part of conventional scientists who have their blinders on to accept that that could occur. It goes against their grain, because the idea that there might be nuclear processes occurring in a simple chemical cell like that does, in fact, fly in the face of all known theory. But it doesn't mean that it's impossible.
Now, that's a key issue there, is how do you make the impossible more visible, as it were, in the mental climate that surrounds research?
The only way of dealing with something that's anomalous is to do experiments to try to find out what is making it occur. The first stage, which I'm satisfied has occurred, is in making it reproducible enough. It's still problems with that, but it's reproducible enough now so that we can be assured that it really is there, okay? The excess heat, the excess energy is there. The nuclear particles have been observed. These should not be occurring. Stage 2 will be when we study it in more detail and find out exactly how it's working. We don't know exactly how it is working now. It's a new process, just as superconductivity was in 1911, when it was accidentally discovered and was not explained for 50 years. The idea that electricity could flow through a metal at very low temperatures with zero resistance was unexplained for 50 years. And yet that didn't mean that it didn't exist, just because we didn't understand it. Here, cold fusion exists, in my opinion, despite the establishment's intention to kill it, because they don't believe the experiments to begin with, but it's not explained. And yet there are some theories that begin to say it works roughly like this.
Help me understand what this really could mean for the average individual citizen. Say people in the less developed nations, for instance. What's the potential at the end of the long trail that seems to be in front of us?
If cold fusion is real, as I firmly believe it is, and is a power source, as I also firmly believe it is, it has great potential for revolutionizing the world in a way that is so staggering that it is hard to even begin to imagine it. It will mean small power plants in houses to heat houses, perhaps to produce electricity in homes, the end of a grid of power lines, perhaps, or central station power, but only from seawater, or the ingredients that are therefrom. No more dependence on oil, no more dependence on fossil fuel, regardless of what one may think of the greenhouse question and the possibility of warming the Earth. If cold fusion could be applied, it will mean no significant pollution from any cold fusion power plant. That whole issue, the whole question of warming of the globe will disappear. It will dramatically decrease, it would seem to me, almost all political tensions that remain in the world, because it seems offhand that the power would be relatively cheap. It's dirt cheap to get heavy water, deuterium is part of heavy water, out of ocean water. $1,000 a gallon. But a gallon is so powerful that, it takes care of a lot of people.
But that's out in the future. That's quite a long way.
It's out in the future, but it may not be so far away. Now, this is an interesting question. We don't know what the time frame is for the development of cold fusion. Many skeptics listening to this program would probably say the man has stepped off the deep end. He actually believes that A, it's real, B, it will be used And C, he's even suggesting that it might be sooner rather than later. Yes, I'll suggest that. I think cold fusion, if it can be controlled, understood, used, may be showing us useful devices within a decade, if not sooner.
Is there, or rather, are there any pollutants that would come from cold fusion?
Cold fusion, when it's finally understood, will probably have some types of pollutants, but they'll be very minimal. Its dominant effect in cold fusion is the release of energy in the form of heat. This is the extraordinary thing. There is tritium in some cases, but it's certainly not consistent in conventional hot fusion terms with the amount of energy that's being released. There's something marvelous about it, which allows nuclear energy release, and if it is a nuclear process, there have to be products that we will find in the system. But they appear not to be, even at these rather impressive levels that have already been developed of power, it appears not to be a big problem.
It sounds from what you've been saying that the international community is taking this whole question of cold fusion much more seriously than American scientists are, in the sense of its potential, in the sense of the fact that it could be there. Am I true? Is that right?
I think in Japan there's a much more open view of cold fusion. It's not necessarily accepted, although there have been some recent dramatic changes in that direction. But I think basically it's much more easygoing in places like Japan and Italy and the Soviet Union, for that matter. India did a lot of work. There are many countries that have done work on this. It is only, it seems, within the United States and England also, where there has been literally a witch hunt against cold fusion.
Aren't we in a way morally bound, though, to look closely at the possibilities of this for the very sake of survival?
I believe that's the case. I believe that to throw out a potentially fantastic new energy source, one that even the skeptics themselves maintain they can't explain. They say, oh, it might be a good battery or this, that, or the other thing. Explain it in conventional terms for me. If you can't explain it in conventional terms, there may be something even more remarkable there. It may be a new power source. They just wish it away. They say, we don't believe it, we're not going to look at it, and goodbye. Okay? Anti-scientific, in my opinion.
Eugene, in a way, you've taken us to the boundaries in one area with cold fusion. The possibilities, the potential is just almost perhaps beyond most of our imaginations. But what other boundaries are interesting you these days? You're not just focusing on cold fusion issues.
Well, I'm interested in all aspects of science, and the thing that interests me the most, I believe, apart from cold fusion, is the possibility that civilizations other than our own may populate the universe, and the galaxies in the universe, the other star systems, planets around other stars. I'm convinced they're there. I've been following the interesting developments over the years in the radio search for extraterrestrial civilizations. National Aeronautics and Space Administration, as well as private foundations and individuals, have been pursuing this, hoping to find a radio signal that represents intelligence out there. That's fascinating to me.
What do you define as intelligence, then?
Well, I believe that the universe comes to life. I wrote a book called The Quickening Universe, which says that, and this is not a new thought, but I synthesized it and said that the laws of nature, the laws of physics, embody molecular evolution, which then evolves into organisms inevitably, given a good planet. Not every planet can harbor life. But in the right conditions, I believe it's inevitable. And I also believe that this thing we call intelligence, which we embody, we believe, in animals also, but we are a more developed form of it, this also exists elsewhere and contemplates itself. That is, the universe contemplating itself.
My thanks to Eugene Mallove. Well, he certainly took us to the outer reaches of space and to the ocean behind me, and that quarter-kilometer cube of ocean water and its potential power. Utopian dream or reality? I guess time will tell.
Okay. I think it was an amazing interview. I think that was done probably, I'm going to say 2000, and it might have actually been earlier than that, and actually I think might have been in the late 90s. But in any case, Mallove was doing a lot of work after Pons and Fleischmann had been discredited. And I think that's really what happened, was that he saw what happened in 1989 with Stephen Jones, of all people, who came back on the forefront during the 9/11 situation. It wasn't the events of 9/11, but it was when Dr. Judy Wood's book, Where Did the Towers Go?, came out in the mid-2000s. It was she was working on it in 2005. It came out in 2007. And all of a sudden, right after that, we have architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, I think is the whole name. We have a lot of people that suddenly appear on the scene out of nowhere. And so it's, I think it would have been really interesting to have Eugene Mallove in the mix. His book, Fire from Ice, you can find it actually online. And I was going to try and find the link for you, but I think I'll let you do your own search. You can find it as a PDF, but you can also purchase it online. So this is just a little bit about him from our favorite Wikipedia page. And so he was a very young guy, actually, when he was murdered. He was there washing his vehicle in front of his house, minding his own business. And he was just about to disclose the information that he had. This was in 2004. And it is acknowledged that he was murdered. I believe down here to say that, yes, Mallove was murdered in 2004 while cleaning out his former childhood home. I'm sorry, I thought he was cleaning his car. Anyway, which had been rented out. 3 people have been arrested and charged in connection with the killing. 2 were convicted of first-degree manslaughter and murder. In 2012 and 2014, the third pleaded guilty to obstruction of justice in 2015. Well, the guy lived in a very quiet neighborhood out in the suburbs, and it wasn't as though they were, going around the neighborhood and shooting people up. It was completely targeted, and yes, there were 3 people involved in this, and there's really no question that the murder had everything to do with the fact that he was going to be releasing information. They couldn't shut him up. He worked at MIT. They tried a variety of different things to get him to just be quiet. Would you mind? Please just be quiet, Dr. Mallove. It's for your own good, that whole thing. And it's just a classic situation. And again, Stephen Jones comes into the picture just because there's the connection there with cold fusion and with Pons and Fleischmann, who we're going to be talking about as well. And really what I'm trying to do is bring this to your attention. And, for those people who are just going to be involved with the question of whether there is such a thing as global warming, for instance, it's a moot point as far as I'm concerned, because unless you're looking at the solution, then the idea of just going around the block and talking about whether the Earth is warming or whether it's not. Yes, there is climate change. The climate has been changing for all the various years that it has been here. And again, that's up for debate. I don't really care to get into that. I'm more interested in, rather than going into the debate aspect, I'm rather interested in looking at the solution. And you've got someone like Mallove who wrote this book, and others that actually talk about the solution. And it's like it's just another distraction to talk about the problems. The global. Yes, okay, fine. Let's say that mankind has done something terrible that needs to be reversed. What are we going to do about it? How are we going to stand up? I've had the challenge in the last few days of having to decide whether to stand up for something or stay comfortable. There's abuses that take place all around us, and it has to do with a fellow. A peer of mine, and I've had very similar things happen to, in my life. What happened to my page? DuckDuckGo, what happened to my page? For some reason, it didn't want to stay on that page. I guess I pushed a button. Anyway, this is Steve Quale, for anyone that knows about him. He's been doing his own investigating and has his own YouTube channel, and he's been on the terrestrial radio just as I have. So he's been working away over the years, trying to disclose things. I would say that in my own small way, I'm doing things in a similar kind of way as what he has been. But just, not for as long and not as possibly as intensely. But in any case, we don't need to compare. But it's just interesting that we're on the same trajectory. And he published this on his website. It was written on May 16th, 2004. And it's actually a really, really good synopsis and information about what happened, because you read the story on Wikipedia and you go, oh, that's interesting. And, they do admit that he was murdered, but they don't actually go into any kind of detail as to what actually happened. So they're asking if there were any witnesses on the Friday night, I guess the night of the murder, on the Salem Turnpike in Norwich. And it says Dr. Eugene F. Mallove was found dead Friday night at his family home at 119 Salem Turnpike, Norwich. And he was 56 years old, killed during a suspected robbery and brutal assault at his family home. So it was his family home. It wasn't as though it was difficult to track him down, because he had, as I understand it, he'd inherited the home and was taking care of it. Either his parents had gone into a home themselves, an old age home. In any case, he was the person that was in charge of it, but it had been in the family for some time, so it wasn't difficult to find him. So he was published author and father of two. He died of multiple injuries to his head and neck, according to an autopsy. I'm no police officer at all, but I know police officers, and as Dr. Judy would also say, you want to follow the evidence in a situation like this, and the evidence would lead one to think that, getting, it's not a drive-by shooting. It's getting out of the car and actually injuring the guy, killing the guy, but injuring him in ways that seem like overkill. And often that's the case when it's a loved one, somebody, and it's an emotional situation, or in the case of somebody who has been contracted to go out and do the job and make sure it gets done. So that was the autopsy results. The death was ruled a homicide. The police would not confirm Mallove's identity Saturday, pending positive identification by family members. So there he was. He was discovered, after police received a report of an injured person. So that is of interest to me too. They found Mallove unresponsive, the victim of an assault. Okay, so some people said that it was a drive-by shooting, or it was something that was just kind of a coincidence that these guys were out on a joyride. No. They, those guys the drive-by shooters are generally pretty cowardly. These guys were brazen. They got out and they actually tracked him down and seemed to know exactly where they were going, and they assaulted him, and they left him for dead. I don't understand necessarily from this whether he was actually dead at the time, but they got a report of an injured person, so that could have just been somebody who saw him and assumed he was injured. So several unidentified items were taken from the scene, and Mallove's vehicle was missing, according to a written statement released by Norwich Police. Okay, so what did they do? They went and they wanted his 1993 green Dodge Caravan. That was what they went there to steal. A 15-year-old car, 13-year-old car, whatever it is. It's easily identifiable by large bumper stickers, including an American flag and his company website, infiniteenergy.com, in the rear window. So, again, it was very targeted. And what were those mysterious items that were taken? Could it have been the the paperwork, the work that he was doing on his new publication, or the information that he was about to release. Anyway, they did a really good cleanup job with this guy. And so for those that are, that get engaged in these kind of conversations about energy and oil, big oil, and all the rest of it, what I would like to do is just encourage you to get educated about these people that are pioneers in free energy. When people say, oh, well, there's it's just like with Dr. Judy, when people say we should do an investigation into 9/11. There has been an investigation into 9/11. Dr. Judy Wood took the contractors, you can't take the government to court, but you can take the contractors to court, and she did that at great personal expense in every possible sense of the word. And she was, the case was dismissed, and there wasn't enough interest. People want to sit around talking about things, and they want to discuss all the ins and outs, but they're not on their feet out there actually doing the work. And that's, something that George Webb talks about as well. The idea that there are people that are sitting in their grandmother's basement talking about things, but they're not actually getting out and doing the work. And, I think it's up to all of us to do the work in whatever way that we can to actually, either hand somebody this book, read it yourself, and then hand it to somebody and say, look, we have the information here. We know that free energy is available. There's no question that there is such a thing as free energy. It's a matter of figuring out, why it's being suppressed. Gee, what a surprise. If you own the energy, you own the world. They talk about owning the banks. Well, if you own the energy, you own the money that goes into the banks. And energy actually is how we control. You can control the weather, you can control the food production, you can control whether people live or die by having control of the energy. And we know about Nikola Tesla and the fact that his invention was not adopted. Why? Because it was free, because it was not part of the electrical grid. And so, his idea was not bought by Westinghouse. They wanted to have a grid system, so that why they could charge for it, and that was what won as the business model. And people will say, well, this is why free enterprise should not be part of the equation. Free enterprise is what gives people the initiative to actually invent things. There's always going to be a nefarious element out there, people that are willing to kill in order to suppress information. And we should know that. Living in the environment we're in right now, we can see that there are people that are willing to kill. They are willing to stop at nothing to get power, to get control, to be able to exercise their will over another person. And as a Christian, I totally understand this, because that I see it as a battle between good and evil. I absolutely see this idea that some people are just not going to bow to anybody, and that's exactly what happened with the fall of when you look at what happened with the battle with Satan. It's he wanted control. And the only difference between somebody who is a Christian or somebody who's a believer and somebody who's not is that they've gone back into the fold. They've gone back into the family and said, look, I really do want to be in this relationship. If you're a parent, then you'll understand this. There's no use running after a grown child who's decided that they don't want to be part of the family. They have to come back of their own volition. You don't force people to do things. You don't force people's hand. And so when you understand the world from that perspective, and you see people that are trying to force other people's hands, or they're trying to quiet them, to suppress them in any way, to belittle them, or whatever they need to do in order to exercise control, to lie, to cheat, to steal. That's what happens to people like Eugene Mallove, and who dares to speak out. And so I do believe that it's really up to us to be the mouthpieces for these people that have really sacrificed their entire life, and they have actually given up so much for us. It's no different than serving their country, in war in order to expose the truth. And I do believe that, yes, it is intimidating, but if enough of us actually will get mad enough and say, this is enough. We're not willing to go along with the program anymore. If enough of us are willing to do that, then the best thing to do is to bring it out into the light. Then it's like what Trump is doing. I totally understand what we may not like him. We may not like how he's doing things. We may not like the way he talks to people, but it takes that kind of person to have the moxie to be able to confront evil and to be able to say, we're not actually going to put up with this anymore. We're not going to put up with this shit. And, we need to drain the swamp. We need to drain it of all of those that would actually want to control us, and that includes keeping technology from us that would make it so that we, as Mallove says in the interview, could have a small power plant in our home, and that would ostensibly make energy of all kinds absolutely accessible and free. Imagine, being able to drive your vehicle. This is what Pons and Fleischmann were saying. A gallon of water would actually go 1,000,000 miles. No wonder we don't have it. But when you hear people talking about global warming or any of the things that, again, I may or may not, I have, I see that as a huge carbon tax grab. And, it's perfect, So rather than saying that, just say, why don't we put that same money that we're putting into a useless, absolutely useless program like climate agreements and all the rest of it, why don't we put that same energy and that same money into pursuing what Pons and Fleischmann were doing, pursuing what Mallove was doing, pursuing what, and we're going to be talking about a couple of other inventors who found themselves dead as well. And I think that, to me, this is something I'm passionate about, and it's why I've been interested in why I got interested in Dr. Judy's work in the first place, because it wasn't about 9/11. It was about the idea that there's technologies that are being kept from us and that are being suppressed. So tomorrow we're going to be talking about Bruce De Palma. And he is, I believe his brother's name is Brian De Palma, but I can't remember. He's a director in Hollywood. But anyway, that's not what we'll be focusing on. We're going to be, what a surprise too. He was from MIT. I believe that MIT is part of the collection agency, actually, but don't tell them that. So we're going to be going on to talk about some of his inventions and his demise as well. So thank you for tuning in, and please spread this information. Like if you appreciate this information, share and subscribe, and please tune in again, because I am going to be disclosing some further information about people who have put themselves on the line to show us their inventions and to prove that there is such a thing as free energy. We'll see you tomorrow night.
To soil his name.